I'm Mike Bonham, the chair. I'm joined by my colleagues Paul Koretz and Paul Krikorian. I understand that Mr. Parks is on his way. We have 7 items on the agenda today. I'd like to continue item 7 for a few more weeks. And unless either of my colleagues would like to have a discussion about it, I was inclined to move item 5 and 6 on the consent agenda. You good with that, Mr. Corey? Okay, so we'll move items 5 and 6 on the consent agenda and continue item 7. We will start with item number 1.
Item number 1 is the CAO report relative to the Department of Transportation contracts with AMCO Parking Systems, Modern Parking Incorporated, and SP Plus Municipal Services for terms of 5 years each and options to extend the contracts for 3 years for the operation and maintenance of 24 city-owned parking facilities.
All right, before the department reports, there's 3 folks with speaker cards. Why don't we, you can stay there because there's 3 of them, so there'll be plenty of seats. James Johnson, Richard Robin Esquire, and Stan, I'm going to butcher this one, Bochniak? Bahian. All right, well, my apologies.
Good afternoon, James Johnson, SEIU Local 721. We are pretty dismayed about finding this item on today's committee agenda. To my knowledge, and I've checked with the staff that represents these workers, there have not been conversations with GSD, with the personnel department, anybody related to DOT on this particular subject for at least 4 to 5 months. So we're a little perturbed that we find this item on the agenda. We have not had an opportunity to fully vet, let alone read the contract through our research department. This is an issue that we have been familiar with. It's been in existence in one form or another for at least 2 years. But I have to say, Local 721, and I come to this mic on behalf of President Schoonover, that the underhanded way upon which the folks who brought this item to the committee agenda today, obviously not members of the committee, obviously I'm speaking of the CAO and the Director of the Department of Transportation, just disgusting. We've not had any opportunity to vet this issue. I saw it late Friday afternoon, and I contacted the appropriate folks to find out what was going on, as well as our research folks. So obviously we're opposed. We're obviously, as we always are, prepared to work with anybody who's willing to work with us to provide quality services, and it even relates to how we run the parking lots here in the city of Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
Okay, James, thank you for coming forward. I appreciate that that you learned about this item late, and we may actually continue it. I do want to note, when you come up here, you're free to say whatever you want, make whatever points you want. I just got to say, as chair and as someone who weighs these issues, when folks come to the table on this or any other issue and attack folks and their character and their motives, I find that considerably less compelling than when folks come up and talk about the merits of an issue. And I would just encourage people who testify before this committee to stick to the merits of the issues and not talk about personalities or characters or motives. The next person to speak is Richard Robin.
Thank you. I apologize, I don't have much of a voice today, so bear with me. I'm an attorney. I represent Parking Concepts. We believe that it would be improper and frankly unlawful to move forward with the CAO's recommendation. There was a schedule set forth in the RFP in terms of when things were supposed to happen. The contract was supposed to be finalized and implemented in a startup in April of 2012. It's now almost 18 months later. That's way too much time to elapse and go forward with something that's been stale. It's been sitting there for way too long. The RFP allows the city to make changes to the schedule, but it doesn't mean they can make unreasonable changes, and I think legally to take something out more than 12 months is totally improper, and I don't think it'd be allowed legally. In this case, the RFP incorporates that 12-month outside date in the RFP itself, and it provides that all of the proposals become stale and ineffective after 12 months. Those proposals were made no later than December 2nd, 2011, so by December 2012, all of the proposals were invalid. There's nothing for the city to accept. The RFP incorporates a number of things that have changed in the last 20 months since the proposals were made. If you look at the financial statements, Standard Parking acquired Central Parking. Based on what I've seen in the Wall Street Journal, it looks like they took on significant debt, $210 million in Central Parking debt and $450 million of lender debt. That's going to significantly change their financial statement from when they provided it. There's been litigation against at least one of the proposed companies. We're not suggesting that it's necessarily going to be successful, but there's significant litigation relating to wage and hours where Modern Parking is a defendant. We think it would be irresponsible for the city not to look at it and just see if it plays a role in its analysis.
Thank you. Next two speakers are Stan and Gary Pitts. Gary, you can come up and sit at the other chair.
Thank you. Stan Bachnick, AMCO System Parking. I'm the Regional Director of Marketing. I just want to let the Transportation Council know, since this was awarded over a year ago, we've had the resources ready to get started right away. We still agree with all the terms that were put in place. The RFP was a fair and open process. There was no contesting of it during that time. There was no contesting of it during the interview process. There's no contesting of it during the awarding process. So it was a very open procedure. And we agree with all the terms that were set forth, and we're ready and willing to start whenever it moves forward. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pitts?
Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you. I just want to say on behalf of Modern Parking, we were pleased to be active in this process of the RFP and submit our proposal. We're happy to be recommended for part of the properties. And we are also, the same as AMCO Parking, ready to go. And even though there has been some delay, and even though part of the collective bargaining agreement has increased some of the costs, we still feel that it's a valid process, and we're ready to start services upon award. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Ida Rubio, and I'm with the City Administrative Office. And as you know, the Department of Transportation is responsible for the operation of and maintenance of off-street parking facilities. A request came to our office to start working on this report in November of 2012. So it has been with our office for a little over 7 months, 8 months, and there have been some delays in getting this report out. Part of our job is to verify information, clarify exactly what's being asked of the proposers, to go back and do due diligence with the numbers that are being projected. So it did take a while for our office to get this report out. To my knowledge, there have been discussions since December with General Services about the potential DOT recommendations. Specifically, I'm not exactly sure specifically with who, but I know with General Service Management, we have had conversations with them regarding the possible displacement of employees. So, as you know, DOT released their RFP back in October of 2011 for the management of these 24 city-owned parking facilities. The primary goal of the RFP was to bring in new operators with the desired expertise in parking operations and marketing initiatives through the use of new technology and to generate additional revenues for the city. In addition, DOT was seeking an operator with financial capacity to purchase equipment and supplies and an operator who can make investments on capital improvements as necessary in order to properly maintain the city facilities. After a competitive review process done by DOT, they are recommending 3 new parking lot operators, AMCO Parking, Modern Parking, and SP Plus, to take over these lots for a total contract amount of $78.8 million. There's an attachment A in the report which identifies the lots along with the specific addresses and council districts for your information. As mentioned by some of the public comment speakers, there are going to be employees that could potentially be displaced. 16 of the lots are currently managed by General Services, and 8 are managed by existing operators on a month-to-month contract. We will work with Personnel Department and General Services to place these employees similar to the model that we're using with the Convention Center. So that is my office's intent. The report before you provides a summary of our review and also recommends that DOT be authorized to enter into agreements with these parking lot operators.
Colleagues, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have
Please.
quite a few. First of all, when we were first looking at leasing our parking lots, we had a lot of concerns, particularly in regards to the Westwood lot, about changes that could be made that would be very detrimental to a struggling business community. One of the things is the rates. How much does the contractor have the authority to change the rates?
The contractor does not have the authority to change the rates. Only the Board of Transportation Commissioners can change the rates, and it has to be in accordance with the current ordinance.
So
They can make a recommendation, and they will be providing recommendations. We've asked that they be provided recommendations monthly, but I believe they can only make a formal recommendation to the board annually. I'd like to ask the DOT to come up, if I can, to address
Please.
the specifics on that.
Because right now, Westwood has dropped over the years dramatically in terms of the effectiveness of its business community, and we've implemented a bid. We're trying to do other things to bring it back. But if there were suddenly considerably higher rates in the one parking structure in Westwood, I think that would have a devastating effect. So I don't know. I want to know how we can continue to have some control over those rates and make sure that doesn't happen.
Good afternoon, council members. Rene Saglas, Parking Facilities Division, LADOT. To answer both, there are two rates that are currently in place. One is controlled by council, which is the Hollywood and Highland, way back in 2002 when a motion was approved by council where all rates for Hollywood and Highland has to go through council for approval. The other operated facilities, the Board of Transportation Commissioners have oversight and control over the rates. In the contract that we will enter into, if approved, is only for the management, operation, and maintenance of the parking facilities. They have no authority nor right to do any changes. In fact, direct answer to your to the Broxton lot, council member, I sat down with Andrew, who's the executive director, I believe, of the Westwood bid, and Mott Smith, and we are working. We've been working together, not Andrew, but Mott Smith. We've been working on how we will be able to work the best for Westwood. One of the things that is the policy of the transportation, the Department of Transportation, is we work with stakeholders, specifically with council district, and of course the bid, so that the purpose of which is to enable the parking facilities, off-street parking, to be of service rather than a burden to the community it serves.
Okay, and do they have control over the uses of the parking compared to the situation that we're in presently? In other words, could they lease some of the parking that's open to the public and lease it to an apartment building that's underparked for more parking and take it away from the business community?
All operational changes or additions, whichever, whether it's a monthly parking, special events, is subject to our approval. So they cannot just do, and let's say, do a long list. We don't normally allow long leasing. We do monthly parking, but not long-term leasing.
And hopefully, even the monthly parking, you're talking about, individuals one at a time and not doing a huge chunk of monthly parking for one particular building and taking it out of use for individuals. Because I think that's really critical for that.
Yes, sir. Well, monthly parking is only what we call a filler. Industry level, there is a maximum percentage to be followed so that you continue to have a proper operation for egress and ingress. Now, if at a certain point the occupancy of the parking structure no longer needs a monthly parking, we will take away monthly parking and just have transient parking in the garage. The main purpose of the off-street parking is for transient parking, not monthly parking.
Right, exactly. So you get that, and that won't change based on the operations.
It will be, we will analyze, we will study, and we will always work in council district if there is anything. If we decide, if at the moment the current condition does not allow a monthly parking, we would first work and let the council district know that we will stop starting, whatever month, and because of the following reason. Occupancy is at 85%, we will close monthly parking.
Okay, very good. What about the concerns raised by the representative from 721 about not having had conversations prior to this coming up? Have you been in touch with them? Has there been any kind of negotiations over this to make sure that displaced workers are covered, et cetera?
Council member, DOT has an MOU with GSD to manage and operate the garage. We are not directly responsible for their staff. The RFP, when it was released and through city attorney, GSD was not able, so they know beforehand that in due time, after the RFP process is finished and completed, they will lose the management and operation. So it is, I wouldn't want to put them in the bad light, but they're the one responsible for their staff. We're responsible for, with GSD, making sure that GSD do their job in operating and maintaining our facilities based on what it was deemed for.
Well,
but we can always work with them.
I can't speak for the council, but I wouldn't vote for this until I knew that
Absolutely.
we'd arranged to place everybody that is currently working in those structures in other positions with the city. So until I've heard that, I'd certainly ask the item be continued.
Well, based on, there is a workers' retention program as part of the standard provision. There's also a union contract with the coalition, and all of contracts, city contracts, would have to follow that. So we will not be able to put that aside without clearing that and then go enter and execute the contract. It's the contract that will be approved is based on the fact that it has to follow all the standard provisions as set forth for all city contracts.
Thank you.
Mr. Parks, Mr. Krikorian? Either of you?
If there is an interest in continuing this, I'd be supportive of.
Yeah, that's the direction I'm looking as well. Is there anything you wanted to ask today, Mr. Parks?
Yeah, I was just going to ask on the question of the personnel. It states, at least in my notes, that the personnel department will offer alternative positions to impacted employees in compliance with the MOU. Is that correct?
There are existing MOUs with these employees, yes, and the city is obligated to offer an alternative or like position.
Okay, but the personnel department's actively engaged in this?
We need to start working with personnel to get the ball rolling on how we're going to place these individuals. That transition plan is not yet in place.
We need a transition plan. The other thing is that, and maybe I missed it, most of the narrative talks about what it costs for these companies to run these facilities. I didn't find what's the revenue that's coming back to the city.
We have established a revenue baseline, which is FY 2012, which at this time is the highest revenue so far for off-street parking. That is our gauge for them as far as their operation is concerned. One of the things that we included in the RFP is the change in the operation from manual to automated. As reflected in our experience with Hollywood and Highland, the change from automated facility to a manual, there is a significant between 15%, about 8 to 15%, depending on the month, of increase in revenue because we have eliminated the cash handling by manually, and so that's the first thing that we would want to do is to be able to transcend from manual to automated parking, and the best part of it is they will be front funding the costs. Unfortunately, SPRF has been tapped out, so we included as part of the RFP for them to front fund, and we will amortize the cost of the equipment during the 5-year or during the term of the agreement.
Okay. But the only question I ask is, can you give us an idea of the revenue that we're going to receive?
I personally believe that there will be a substantial amount of revenue.
Like you got dollars, numbers, letters?
The last number I have, Hollywood and Highland, was at $10 million. That's the baseline pick that we are. And for the 23, we are at $6.5 million. So we expect at least a minimum of about 5 to 10% increase in revenue.
Okay, 5 to 10% of the 16 million you just commented on?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so what I'd like to do...
Let me just finish
sure.
one other thing I was going to ask. Was there any consideration when you picked the lots about doing anything in downtown? Because I know that like Pershing Square, they're busy during the day, but the evening and weekend hours appears that they're dormant. I mean, in the sense of specialized type of a RFP to look at how revenue could be generated when they're at downtime in some of these major downtown lots.
One of the objectives of LEDOT finding new ways of marketing is what you call a weekend car park sharing, and we will establish that as part of our initiative as additional way of making our parking facilities have the occupancy during the weekend or special events as the case may be. In fact, I've been approached by a company here in downtown where they would want to use 755, which is the cathedral lot here in St. Viviana, to do evening valet parking. It's closed after 6 o'clock in the evening, so it's basically nothing. So I always said it's better to have something than zero. So that's one of the things that we would like to look at, is to make the most out of it, make the most out of our assets during downtime, especially weekends.
Can I just say, in the sense of continuing it, I missed that. Is there something going on?
Yeah, there were some concerns raised by Local 721. Both Mr. Koretz and I wanted to get more answers on that. Mr. Krikorian was also supportive of a continuance, and my recommendation was going to be is that we continue for 30 days and have DOT, GSD, and personnel provide a written report when we come back that includes 3 things: a final list of the number of city employees who are being displaced by the contract award, 2, a detailed transition plan for placing GSD employees in other city positions or with the private contractor, and 3, a description of how the services currently provided by GSD employees will be transferred to private operations without disruption to the public who use the parking facilities.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might just add one other point to follow on to Mr. Parks' question, an analysis of the likely revenues that can be anticipated from this, because while I appreciate the ballpark estimates, I'd like to have a little bit more.
It'd be good to have it in writing with
There's
some...
been an actual economic analysis done.
Exactly.
And number 5, if I could add that we just direct them to meet with representatives from 721 so that they can air their concerns and attempt to address those through this process as well.
Okay. So
If I could, excuse me, Mr. Chair, if we could also add the CAO as part of the report back, I think they need to be involved.
Absolutely, particularly on the financial analysis. Okay, thank you.
I would just ask if we can ensure that in 30 days, we've been waiting, I think we've had about a 4-year odyssey on parking lots. And if there's some way that we can ensure it is 30 days.
Paul and Maria are nodding yes. Great. Okay, item number 2.
Item number 2 is a Wes and Zine motion requesting the city attorney to prepare an ordinance to prohibit the parking of vehicles for a for sale sign on Washington Boulevard between South Ardmore Avenue and South Catalina Street, South Normandy Avenue and Venice Boulevard to the Santa Monica Freeway, and Little Normandy Avenue from Washington Boulevard to the dead end. And
Okay,
this was before the council, it was referred back to Transportation Committee. I believe the council office has some issues they wanted to address. And
Yeah, as I understand it, in order for this to move forward, there needs to be a public hearing with findings made, and this is actually that occasion. So there's a representative here from Mr. Wesson's office, Rebecca Liu.
Hi, Rebecca Liu from Councilman Wesson's office. This is Billy Green, also from the Councilman's office.
Welcome.
First of all, I think since it was in Transportation Committee previously, the boundaries being requested by the council office and the community have changed. And so now the new boundaries of this parking area that we'd like to have are Normandy between 15th Street on the north and the 10 freeway on the south, Little Normandy south of Venice Boulevard, and Washington Boulevard between South Kingsley on the west and South Catalina on the east. So it's a slightly bigger area than was previously in Transportation Committee. Just a little bit of background. This has been a problem for several years and it continues to get worse. We created a task force with LAPD, DMV, and DOT where we were able to find out that several of the vehicles being parked on the street for sale were stolen. This resulted in a couple arrests and towing of vehicles. And the problem has continued since then. We've also had the curbs painted red and a 1-hour parking signs installed, and the problem continues still. Not only is it visual blight, but these cars park all day and overnight, leaving very little spots for our residents to park. This is particularly a problem at night when residents are coming home from work and do not have places to park their car. It also causes congestion on these busy streets of Normandy and Washington where cars are slowing down or people are stopping to look at these cars for sale. I think that you guys were all passed out photos. We have photos of the parked cars, and there's a petition with over 100 signatures submitted by residents of the area.
You can give those to the city clerk.
Okay.
Colleagues, any questions? Mr. Kretz.
Have you looked at the possibility of towway being added to going over the whatever limitation you put in place for sale signs?
Have we looked at what, sir?
Making it a towway zone. So if your problem is that you restrict it as an hour and people park there all day anyway and it's not solving the problem, I didn't read this super carefully. I don't know if towway is included, but if you can do it, that would probably solve the problem almost instantly. If you're there for more than an hour with a for sale sign in your car gets towed.
I believe, Councilmember, the issue is that the residents can't park, that there's limited parking there. It's not a question of having a towway zone because you would prevent the residents and merchants.
Well, if you had a towway zone for cars with for sale signs only.
That's part of the law already.
That's part of this.
Yeah.
Then, and obviously you'd create a lot of parking for the residents that don't have for sale signs if you towed them. So I don't know if that, I'm not sure if I'm understanding whether that's part of what you have existing already, because if it is, I can't imagine how the problem would continue for very long if you towed everyone away.
It's not a tollway zone. This is what we're asking for. If the sign cars for sale as a tollway zone, that is what we're asking for,
Okay, good.
for the residents.
Very good, because I think that's the towaway part of it's the key element to it.
And the boundaries that you listed today, I was unclear, are those different than the ones in the original motion?
They are.
Okay, so you would need us to act today to amend the motion before it goes to council to reflect the boundaries as listed. Do we need to state them again?
No, I haven't.
John's got them? Okay. Colleagues, any other questions? So I believe this consent to move this forward to council as amended. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 3.
Item number 3 is a Krikorian-Koretz motion directing the CLA in conjunction with LADOT and the city attorney to develop a flexible policy to allow for reasonable non-commercial advertising by nonprofits on city-owned transit vehicles and directing DOT to defer on behalf of AIDS Walk LA the enforcement of existing bus advertising policy regulations until later this year.
Great. This was originally Mr. Krikorian's motion. Mr. Krikorian, I have 2 speaker cards from folks from APLA. Would you prefer to hear from the department first or from the public?
I think it makes sense to set this into a context to hear from the members of the public first.
Good afternoon. Jim Lefton with the Department of Transportation.
If I may hear the speakers
I'm sorry.
from the public
Oh,
first.
okay, sure. I misunderstood that as well. Craig Thompson and Barbara Friedman. Come on up.
Good afternoon. I'm Craig Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of AIDS Project Los Angeles. And we're here to support, obviously, the Koretz and Krikorian motion to allow nonprofits to advertise both our services and our fundraising events. And this commonly known as non-commercial advertising on city transit buses, but particularly to stress an exemption for this year's AIDS Walk Los Angeles, because those ads should be out and on the street in the next 30 days. I think most of you know we're one of the oldest and largest AIDS service organizations in the country. We've been doing this work for about 30 years. We serve over 11,000 people each year in the city and the county of Los Angeles. The Department of Transportation regulations have been in place for many years, but they are recently being enforced in a different way. This new enforcement prohibits all non-commercial advertising, basically, from nonprofits. Now, that stops even health promotion messages like know your status, get an HIV test. Even if that campaign is funded by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, those ads would no longer be allowed. We're also not allowed to run ads for AIDS Walk Los Angeles to generate support, fundraising for the efforts we need to continue to support our services. Again, we've been able to do these ads for many, many years under the regulations, but the regulations are now being enforced differently. Also, a point of context, we recently went through this exact same process with the MTA, around MTA buses. This came up last year with the MTA, and we were able successfully to resolve this issue in June, May or June of this year with the MTA. I'd be happy to share a memo done by our pro bono counsel at Latham & Watkins on the legal issues. And we also look forward to working with the city attorney and the Department of Transportation on crafting regulations that work for both nonprofits and obviously the city. Thank you. Thank you. Wow.
Barbara?
Good timing.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Friedman, and I'm representing AIDS Walk Los Angeles and Craig Miller, the event senior organizer and founder who is presently out of the country. First, we're very grateful to Council Member Krikorian for presenting the motion before you, as well as to Council Member Koretz for his leadership on this issue. And we also appreciate really every member of the committee. We're proud to include you among our family of longtime AIDS Walk Los Angeles supporters. For the past 18 months, we have been working along with AIDS Project Los Angeles in the Los Angeles County region. And I'd like to share with you a little of what we've seen, what we haven't seen, and what we hope very much to see as this committee now considers this issue. We have seen some staff articulate conclusions without the benefit of really comprehensive analysis that this issue actually requires. We've seen some administrative systems that accept such conclusions without evaluating the supporting analysis. And to our great concern, we've seen at least one jurisdiction where policymakers acted really without considering the grave unintended consequences of essentially making public health messaging invisible as described by Mr. Thompson. What we have not seen is a legal consensus that a commercial versus non-commercial standard is any more legally sustainable.
Please conclude.
Than a I wonder, am I too close to the mic?
No, that was an indication that your time is up.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yes.
So very sorry. If I could just have another moment, I did not realize this.
Just finish your paragraph.
Okay. What we would like to see, what we hope is that the city's policy does not elevate the selling of goods over the doing of good, rather a policy that truly reflects the values of this great community.
Thank you. Before we go to the staff, I just want to acknowledge we've been joined by Mr. LaBonge.
Thank you, Michael.
Welcome. Please.
Jim Lefton with the Department of Transportation. LADOT's bus advertising policy is very similar to what Metro had adopted in 2000 and what Santa Monica has adopted and many other jurisdictions across the country. It includes a ban on non-commercial, non-governmental advertising. The reason that this language is put in place in a number of jurisdictions is that the concern is that if you do not include such a prohibition, that you basically open the door for any group that wants to present their particular issue as a First Amendment issue. You basically open the door to anybody, and that could open the door to any number of controversial, undesirable types of advertising. So this advertising, this policy has been put in place basically to avoid that scenario and the risks that the city would face if it were to allow certain ads and not other types of ads. So we've enforced that policy since we've initiated our bus advertising policy, our program in 2006. In 2012, it's our understanding that AIDS Walk did put advertising on a number of our buses. I believe there were 12 ads that were purchased. That was in September of 2012. We contacted our vendor, Titan, in September 2012 about that and notified them in writing that going forward that they needed to enforce the department's policy on bus advertising consistently across the board. So that's basically where we stand today. The Metro Board, as was referenced, did adopt a change to their policy very recently, admittedly against the staff's recommendation, whereby they included an exception that if the entity such as AIDS Walk were to partner with a governmental agency such as Metro, sign some paperwork, have the governmental agency insignia on the ad, etc., that would be acceptable, and that's what the Metro Board approved. And so we'll have to see what legal challenges come of that, but that is the policy that Metro adopted. Santa Monica, on the other hand, when they faced this issue with AIDS Walk last year, took the issue up and voted to retain the existing policy, which was similar to what we have, and they did not allow for any short-term exceptions to allow AIDS Walk to place advertising. So each agency is dealing with it a little bit differently, and the bottom line issue, obviously, is the risks that the agency would face, liability-wise.
Okay, I'm going to defer on this line of questioning to the makers of the motion. So first, Mr. Krikorian, and then Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue arose in the context of my concerns about AIDS Walk Los Angeles, of course, and its ability to advertise the 25th? What year are we in?
29th.
29th. The 29th annual AIDS Walk, a crucially important Los Angeles institution that it has become. The first AIDS Walk anywhere on planet Earth, invented here in Los Angeles, and one of the principal funding vehicles for AIDS Project Los Angeles. But it raises a broader question about the application of advertising restrictions in the DASH system and otherwise. And I recognize that there are difficult constitutional questions that get raised whenever we address any of these sorts of issues. And that, I think the motion is directed in the first place at finding a sensible policy that results in a consistent policy throughout the city that is content neutral, but also provides some sense of logic as well as compliance with the constitutional restrictions. What we have right now, if we allow commercial advertising but not nonprofit advertising, is you have the ability of McDonald's to advertise how great it is to eat a Big Mac, but you don't have the ability to advertise obesity prevention messages. You can have Chevron run advertisements about what great stewards of the environment they are, but you can't have the Sierra Club run advertisements suggesting to the contrary. It just seems to me that this commercial, non-commercial distinction results in entirely illogical results. And by the way, it's entirely inconsistent with what we do in other contexts in this city. Our street banner program, for example, that bus that's going down the street is driving underneath street banners, and it's the policy of this city to restrict those street banners only to nonprofit, non-commercial speech. So on the one hand, we have the street banners advertising nonprofits, and commercial advertising is prohibited. And then on the bus, we have commercial advertising only and nonprofit speech is prohibited. It's an illogical policy that we need to address from a constitutional, in a thoughtful way, with a mind to these constitutional guarantees that people have. That being said, as we're in the process of trying to develop a more sensible policy that addresses those concerns, I certainly think that AIDS Walk Los Angeles, which has been relying on this advertising program to promote this particular event, ought to be allowed the latitude to meet its goals, its promotional goals, so with a relaxed enforcement process in place until we can work out a more sustainable policy for the longer term.
Mr. Kretz? Yeah, I think we're certainly in agreement on this, although I think APLA is the most innocuous example. I mean, everybody knows it's not a controversial issue. We all want to raise money for AIDS services. I think I've gone to every AIDS walk since they started. But at the same time, you also don't want to take all these health messages that we've used for years. I mean, even, still in the HIV realm, know your status, get tested. You can't do that now. Or messages discouraging youth smoking or drunk driving. I mean, taking these messages off literally could cost lives and certainly go against the direction that we would like to head in. And, I mean, I don't want to be less tactful than Mr. Krikorian, but this is an insufferably bureaucratic response to an issue that might be anticipated and doesn't even exist. I don't believe LA ever had a real problem with advertising that we're responding to, like a really serious, sticky issue. They've occasionally popped up in other jurisdictions. They've been handled by other jurisdictions without having to implement this kind of a policy. It's such a bad policy that nobody really was that aware of it among elected officials in this city, or we probably would have overturned it years ago. We became aware of it when it was implemented, and we certainly would want to turn that around. So in any way that we can completely void this entire policy and return back to what we did as a practical matter, even not knowing we were violating our policy and completely removing this policy, would be the direction I'd like to go in. So obviously we want to move fast and make sure APLA can get advertising for their event. But at the same time, I think we want to be able to get nonprofit advertising and health messages especially back on these buses and everywhere else we can get them, so we can continue saving lives relating to all these different issues.
Mr. LaBonge.
Mr. Chair, what if we say the City of Los Angeles supports AIDS Walk 2013? Is that legal?
Well, that's a good question for the city attorney. But
All right, Mr. City Attorney, that's what I'm going to ask. I want to put the City of Los Angeles supports AIDS Walk 2013.
Under our current policy and the policy of most cities, particularly in the Ninth Circuit, which is something we're going to have to look at because we're governed by the Ninth Circuit's policies on these issues. If a government sponsors the advertising, if it's a government done by the government, yes, we can do that.
Okay, I move we say City of Los Angeles supports AIDS Walk 2013 with a nice smiling picture of Mr. Miller on the corner of that.
I'd second that.
The distinction I want to make regarding why we can put banners on the streets is because streets are a traditional public forum. Buses are not a traditional public forum. The fear that Mr. Lefton is talking about is if you make a bus a traditional public forum, then we have to allow every group who wants their message on. That's what happened in New York. The Second Circuit ruled that a group that hated Muslims could advertise that they hated Muslims, and that was actually on the bus.
Have we had that issue with street banners?
That I don't know, but I don't know about, in terms of what the Ninth Circuit, I would have to look at what you have prepared in terms of your pro bono work by Latham and Watkins, because they will probably include what the Ninth Circuit position is in that.
Because Mr. Krikorian's analogy is an interesting one. I mean, if we have a policy that permits for nonprofits on street banners.
But I believe we have to because it is a traditional public forum. What we are doing with that policy is, because they're allowed to protest in the street, it's just a way of getting out their messages. It's also a safe way of doing it.
It's not a question of why we have the policy. It's a question of the impact of the policy. Mr. Krikorian was pointing out that regardless of why we have it, we allow them on street banners, and that hasn't resulted in the anti-Muslim hate speech banner, for instance.
The result,
we just haven't had
the most innocuous possible advertising on all those street banners. I've never seen one that was, a fraction as controversial as some of the things we see on billboards, for instance.
This district, I don't know about in this jurisdiction, but I know that Chicago had a huge problem when I was a student at Northwestern with pro-Nazi groups putting up banners. We actually had to have them on Sheridan Road along Northwestern campus. A few of them went up. And so it can become a huge issue in a public forum. I would like to look at the Latham and Watkins. Our office will study that, and our attorneys have advised as well. If it's a government message, if we support...
City of Los Angeles supports.
...on the signs, then yes, we believe that...
So a lot of the broader questions will get looked at in the first part, in the first part of the motion. As for the second part of the motion, which would immediately allow the advertising for the AIDS Walk, Mr. Krikorian, would you be okay with us taking an action that says the City of Los Angeles supports in order to cover us that way?
Well, certainly that would be an approach. My concern would be that if there is ad copy that's already been prepared and banners have been printed and so forth.
They get a sticker and put it on top, just like re-elect.
Difficult to do that, and I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of spitballing legal analysis in the course of the committee hearing and deciding let's do this because we think we can. I would prefer to advance this forward with an effort to work with the city attorney to develop this policy, but convey to the council the sense of this committee that AIDS Walk Los Angeles's banners advertisements should be able to be utilized this year. Now, if it turns out in the course of that examination with the city attorney, if there's ways that we can do that to make that more protective of the city's interest, particularly between now and the time that it gets to council, I think that makes every bit of good sense. I just don't want to prejudge the city attorney's analysis in working with AIDS Walk and working with the department.
And just a question along those lines. The City of LA is a sponsor of the event. We've done some fee waivers or something.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'd be perfectly justified in, I mean, we've been a partner of AIDS Walk since Tom Bradley walked in the very first AIDS Walk 29 years ago.
Yep.
So this city has been a close partner with AIDS Walk throughout its history. So I don't think there's any question that we would be justified in doing that. I just think that should be part of the city attorney's discussion.
I believe you'd want to make a finding at full council that you want to do those things as well. I mean, I'll discuss it with my office and talk to our First Amendment people, but I think that would be something you'd also want to do as part of any motion in terms, at least in the short term, to make sure that those signs are up.
Mr. Kretz.
Do we know how long the City of Los Angeles and Metro and RTD have all had advertising on their buses?
LADOT since 2006. Metro, their latest policy was 2000, the one that ours was modeled after.
How long have they had signs?
They had bubble-up signs when I was a kid, and they were circles.
They've had signs
on the front. Forever.
For many, many years.
Yeah.
50 years, 60 years?
70 years.
Probably since the 70s at least.
And how many problems of this kind have come up in either the city or Metro
Well,
district?
I mean, if you look at the Metro staff report, maybe they argue that one of the reasons you haven't seen much of an issue is because their policy has been that they don't allow any of these non-commercial ads, so it hasn't bubbled up to be an issue. But if you look at what's happening across the country, San Francisco, Washington, New York, these issues have been major controversial issues where they've tried to restrict really what they feel were offensive ads, and the courts have ruled that you can't do that you can't allow certain types of ads.
When did they start implementing their policy?
Metro's current policy
Implementing it, not just having it.
Metro implemented in 2000, and I think they followed through every year since then. Santa Monica had a policy which they weren't enforcing for 5 or 6 years, and last year they decided they were going to retain the policy and enforce it.
And all of these entities, from the time they didn't have a policy to the time that they finally started implementing it, had how many problem issues?
I'm not aware of any major issues in the LA County area.
See, I don't understand why we're implementing the solution first rather than having a problem first. It seems like we've gone for decades with only innocuous advertising on our buses. I don't see why we can't return to that until we actually see a problem. If we actually had a problem that was a fine point, and the American Nazi Party was starting to insist on advertising on our buses, I'd say we could worry about it then. We have such a long history of not running into the problem.
That's certainly an option for the council. There's a legal risk, but whether that's a significant risk or not, if that's what the council chooses to do, we certainly would be very happy to go along with that.
Mr. Parks?
I just think we have to be a little cautious, having been here when we debated this before. I think it's an issue that it's not the one time or the issue that we're talking about, AIDS LA, everybody likes that. It's the one you don't like that will come back to haunt you. And if you open the door, you can't close it. We thought at one time in the city that we could tell businesses that can and could not come into the convention center. And the city attorney advises that you don't have that ability. And that's why we have the largest porno show in the world at the convention center, because we thought we could tell them not to show up. So the key is that if you like them, it's fine. If you don't like them, it's not so fine. And as we saw in the police department, everybody wondered why the ACLU would be there to defend things you like. And then they showed up and said, yes, the Nazis have a right to be on City Hall front lawn. And so the key is opening the door, and you can't close it once you open it. If you wait for it to be a problem, you'll have multiple problems, because once it's there, you can't act like it disappeared. And so that's what I think we have to be cautious. And if we open up this window for this organization, for this event, if someone comes right behind them and says, can I do that also, you got to be prepared to deal with that.
I agree.
Well, let me ask a question, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Can I ask-
Krikorian was next.
I very much agree with Mr. Parks' identification of the challenge that we'll face in developing a sound policy. But the door, at least with regard to AIDS Walk, has already been opened because AIDS Walk has previously advertised. And so in that respect, I think it's just a question of continuing the prior practice for this year. But I agree that is absolutely the difficulty in addressing this. But, you know, it doesn't seem to me to make sense that we will be forced to accept commercial advertising, such as advertisement for that adult convention that you're talking about, or for marijuana dispensaries in our neighborhoods, or for websites promoting promiscuity, and then we won't be able to advertise public health messages to address some of the consequences of those things. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Mr. LeBon, you had a question?
Just a technical question. If we say the city of Los Angeles supports Park Day, Hike for Health, and put it on a dash bus, is that legal?
Yes.
If we say the city of Los Angeles supports AIDS Walk 2013, is that legal?
I believe that would probably
And if we have a policy CLA that says they have to get a council motion to approve this on that, could that be a vehicle like when we did in the past when we used to waive fees? So there would be a motion that would
I think
put it
we'd
in?
have to study that.
Let the lawyer study it, and let's get him a sticker for his banner.
Right. So let me see if I can suggest a way forward on this. There's two parts to Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Koretz's motion. One is that we begin to work on a policy moving forward, and the second is to request DOT to defer enforcement on the existing regulation to allow the AIDS Walk signs. There was a suggestion made by Mr. Labange and Mr. Koretz. What I would suggest, and Mr. Krikorian raised a legitimate concern that we shouldn't be spitballing legal analysis here in committee. What I would suggest...
Hey, let me just do just the thing there.
Let me finish my suggestion first, and then go ahead and deconstruct, is that we could move forward with the motion as written, with the instruction that the city attorney make the appropriate findings to make sure that we're doing the second part of the motion legally and with the appropriate due diligence, which may include their recommendation, may not.
I guess, if I understand it, so that the city attorney would work with AIDS Walk Los Angeles to ensure that their advertisements will be in compliance with the law, and I think AIDS Walk would have enough flexibility to be able to do that. Am I correct, Mr. Thompson?
Well, the issue is right now the law doesn't have any language in it about government support. Right. It just says the government can do this directly.
Right.
It's silent about everything else. It also, though, says you can't advertise tobacco or liquor or a whole bunch of other things. So there's some other things that are there that, you know, can't be done. So I'm just not clear how...
Which are, by the way, content-based.
Exactly. There are all these other content distinctions in there already. These regulations get very messy, obviously. I would suggest Seattle has taken a very good approach, and there's a Ninth Circuit case right now that is about to come down that's going to decide the Seattle regulations one way or the other. So we're going to know.
If I may, that's as to the first part of the motion, and I get the sense that we are moving forward and looking at the other cities, determining what an appropriate, sustainable, long-term policy is. The issue is for the October event that's upcoming. What can we do that will allow your advertising to go forward? And Mr. Labange has made a suggestion of putting a city sticker on it, or there may be other solutions. And I think what the chair is suggesting is that we instruct the city attorney to work with AIDS Walk Los Angeles to find a way to ensure that those advertisements will be able to go up in the dash buses, whatever that way may be.
And then Mr. Labange had one more question, and then Mr. De La Vega.
I just think the city attorney should look at everything we do.
Yes.
And I don't think we should worry about, obviously, be concerned, but whatever the parameters is a good idea. You figure out if it's legal, and there's nothing bad about a spitball unless you're on the losing side. So, anyway, that's why I wanted to say that.
Spitballs are illegal now.
I know, but I mean, the baseball, you're going back 100 years. Okay.
My experience has been the city attorney doesn't look at the stuff I'd like them to look at and looks at the stuff I don't want them to look at. So,
Content-based discrimination.
Mr. Koretz and then Mr. De La Vega, I'll get to you in a second.
So I'm not clear on this. Is there a formal process to allow street banner content to be regulated? And if so, what is that process?
For street banners, I have the
Yeah.
policy here if you want to see it.
Is there a way to describe it in 2 sentences?
Yeah, if it's a city-related event, the council can approve street banners. The council is mandated to approve nonprofit advertisements that are public service announcements of a general civic nature or which contain wording recognizing the existence of the diverse neighborhoods throughout the city of Los Angeles.
So why couldn't we apply that to non-commercial bus advertising? So if it has to be public service oriented, then it
and the city,
couldn't be.
the city attorney's response would be because this isn't a traditional public forum, and so if you do that, it immediately becomes one. So again, I'm really hesitant to try to figure this out right here. As long as we can instruct the city attorney to work with AIDS Walk Los Angeles to ensure that those ads will be able to go up in
Or to
some
work with the
legal
Department of
fashion.
Transportation, because the contract is through the Department of Transportation.
Mr. De La Vega.
Jaime De La Vega, DOT. I have 2 suggestions for the committee. On the second point in Mr. Krikorian's motion, I think just for clarity, the committee and the council should just direct DOT to accept advertising from AIDS Walk LA subject to the current advertising rates, and just make it very clear what the direction from the council is to the department. And then I think my other recommendation is that the committee and council adopt a finding that this event advances public health. I think that would sort of fence off what types of events the council is approving and may approve in the future, and doesn't leave the city exposed to, we're just approving any event willy-nilly. It's based on the fact that this event advances public health.
I think that makes every bit of good sense. I'd prefer to have by the time it gets to council, to have the city attorney's formal comment on it.
So, Mr. Krikorian, would you like to make a motion on how to proceed, and then we'll vote on that?
Should I reread?
Yeah, if you have it written.
Could I
out,
add
that-
something to yours? I'm not sure if it should be event-based, because there are a lot of public health messages that should be out there. I mean, a public health message encouraging people to know their HIV status has nothing to do with an event, but it's an important public health message.
But again, what we're trying to address is this one specific instance while we're working on a larger, more comprehensive, more
Right, but
sustainable
for the second
policy
part,
based on
I mean, arguably
principles.
Arguably, a future city council policy would set out what type of non-commercial events you would want to allow, and then you make findings on each individual event or message at the time. So this is my recommendation specific to this event.
I think you're fine until somebody says, I want to put an ad on anti-abortion, or I'm opposed to stem cell research. All of them are health factors. So it just depends on what the other issue is.
And again, we're not, under your suggestion, we're not creating the policy.
That's
We're
correct.
making a finding relating to this event.
Right. And then you're
we're
directing us
continuing
to accept the
work to
advertising.
develop the policy, which, I mean, might be more restrictive than that, it might be less restrictive than that.
Okay, so as I understand it, the motion is to approve Mr. Krikorian's motion with the instruction that the city attorney work with AIDS Walk Los Angeles to make the appropriate findings to make sure that it's legal and incorporate the suggestions of Mr. De La Vega.
Is that correct?
And what about, and my further motion to the City of Los Angeles supports, should we have them look at that?
That's included in that. That's part of the work with AIDS
Thank you.
Walk Los Angeles and city attorney.
Committee members, should the direction or to the request of the city attorney be to work with DOT rather
Yes,
than with
thank you.
AIDS
Yes.
Walk LA?
Thank you.
Yes.
To-
Because it's
Okay.
going to be government-sponsored.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so it's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Craig, before you get away, could I, Mr. Chair, remember the name Eunice Chesler, who was such a champion for AIDS Walk? And when they had it, I don't know if any remember Eunice Chesler at Paramount, when they used to have it studios. And I believe the first AIDS Walks was at Western and Wilshire in the 4th District, and John Farrar was very helpful in that as well. Thank you.
And by the way, I also want to recognize Barbara Friedman and thank her for her service to the people of the state of California as a longtime member of the state legislature representing the San Fernando Valley and much of the Silver Lake and Los Feliz area as well. So it's
And
good.
she lived on Garden Avenue on the west side of the street.
Okay, item number 4.
Item number 4 is a DOT report relative to increasing the appropriation within the Transportation Grant Fund from $1.6 million to $19.57 million in order to proceed with the construction of the Wilshire Bus Rapid Transit Project.
Just one question before we start. I meant to ask this at the beginning of the meeting. Anybody in the room who has taken public transportation since the last T committee meeting, please raise your hand. Or bicycle?
I have
All right, okay. I'm going to do that at each meeting, just to check. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name's Will Halverson. I'm with the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation, along with the Bureau of Engineering, recommend...
Can you bring the mic a little bit closer? Thank you.
The Bureau of... The Department of Transportation, along with the Bureau of Engineering, recommends that the existing appropriation for the Wilshire BRT within the Transportation Grant Fund be increased to allow BOE to authorize its contractor to proceed with construction. In June 2011, the City Council approved the Wilshire BRT project, which is a 7.7-mile peak period bus-only lane. In August of 2011, the City Council authorized an initial $1.6 million appropriation for the pre-design and design work of this project. And is now, the design has been completed. BOE has advertised this project and has awarded the project and needs to have an increase in the appropriation in order to allow its contractor to proceed with the construction.
Colleagues, Mr. LaBonge?
Yeah, this is starts at Westlake Avenue and goes west. Is this correct?
The initial construction is from Western to San Vicente Boulevard.
Western to San Vicente, so the western section, not the central section. So, members, this is big time. Wilshire is the busiest bus route in the city, busiest bus route west of Manhattan, I believe. So I want to thank all of you, and especially want to thank Zaki Mustafa for your great leadership always. This is going to have impact, and then following at the same time, last night I was on Wilshire, and they're already doing utility moves for the subway, so there'll be a lot of activity. This will be well coordinated. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Colleagues?
Great job.
All right, move this forward.
Approved.
Are there any general public comment?
No,
cards?
sir.
All right.
Can I just ask a thing?
Yes.
I want to just acknowledge Purvi, who's been my deputy on this for a number of years, is moving. This is her last meeting. She's going in the private industry. She's going to make so much money, she's going to come back and fix the structural deficit in the city. She's going to Mercury Consulting. So I just want to acknowledge her. The other thing I was going to ask, could we put on a future meeting that PUC decision on that?
Wait, before you move on to that.
Yeah, a round of applause first.
That online transportation thing, PUC just made a decision.
Oh, Lyft and Uber? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Meeting adjourned.
Oh, we are adjourned.